troviamo al Cairo alla fine di un meraviglioso viaggio che ci ha portato prima a Luxor, poi ad Aswan e infine qui nella capitale dell'Egitto. Un viaggio con il ricercatore John Anthony West, che ha sempre studiato l'Egitto, questa antica civiltà, dal punto di vista del simbolismo, e quindi questo è stato un viaggio che ci ha portato davvero all'essenza, al cuore di questa antica civiltà. E ora siamo qui di fronte alle piramidi, di fronte quindi alla piana di Giza, in compagnia di John Anthony West, che si è reso disponibile per un'intervista sul suo lavoro e sui recenti sviluppi della sua interessantissima ricerca. E siamo qui per fargli alcune domande. John, could you tell us something about the aim of a trip like this one?
Like all my trips, it's designed to take people through Egypt and allow them to see it through symbolist eyes. This is the interpretation diametrically opposed to anything that anyone gets in a school or university that demonstrates that everything that is taught as official about Egypt is essentially incorrect. Not the facts as such, but the interpretation of the facts. Egypt is presented as a kind of magnificent superstition. The Egyptians believed this and the Egyptians believed that, and built all of these incredible temples and created all of this extraordinary art and sculpture in the name of a superstition, actually, of a false doctrine and a kind of fantastic belief in imaginary gods and an imaginary afterlife and so on. The symbolist interpretation, developed by the Alsatian-born alchemist, practicing alchemist, mathematician, orientalist, egyptologist, the genius with the unpronounceable name, R.A. Shkreli, is in direct contrast to that official explanation. It is, in effect, proof, demonstrable proof, through the most rigorous scholarship imaginable, that Egypt was the source of a great sacred science, a tremendous doctrine based upon, I wouldn't say the belief, I would say the knowledge that there is such a thing as immortality, that it is possible for the human being through his or her own conscious effort to arrive at a level of consciousness that does not die when the body dies. This is what Egypt is all about, and when it's seen through symbolist eyes, it is a revelatory experience. I've been doing these trips now for 25 years, and it's very rare that people come back from a trip to Egypt and do not feel that their lives have been changed. A wonderful travel book on Egypt written 150 years ago, 160 years ago, by a much misunderstood, famous but much misunderstood lady, Florence Nightingale. She was here in 1850, and she wrote home to her friends and parents, "One wonders that people come back from Egypt and live lives the way they lived them before." And even today, with mass tourism and, of course, better facilities than Florence Nightingale enjoyed, it is the same Egypt, and it has the same effect. My own one-line description or two-line description of Egypt is to say it's like sex. And people say, "Well, why is it like sex?" I say, well, you can read all about it and you can look at pictures, but until you've experienced it, you don't know anything at all.
You are well known worldwide for your research on the Sphinx, together with the geologist Robert Schoch. And that research made it clear, proved that the Sphinx is much, much older than what is officially stated. What are the implications then of this research?
The implications are that everything, again, that has been taught about ancient history, not just Egypt, but everything about ancient history and the evolution of human civilization is completely wrong. It does not go from stupid old cavemen and simple hunter-gatherers in a straight line to ourselves with our wonderful advanced civilization that features such things as weapons of mass destruction and atom bombs and Walmarts and McDonald's and Disneyland and Hollywood. All of these wonderful things are the result of thousands of years of human development and progress. By challenging the dating of the Sphinx, which, by the way, is hardly a new idea. Traditions all over the world, from time immemorial, the Greeks themselves acknowledged that Egypt was the fount of the source for Western civilization, and moreover, that source dated much, much further back into the past. Virtually every esoteric, metaphysical, religious book dating back to ancient times talks about a golden age, a period when there was a much more advanced civilization than anything we have now, or even then, talking about, let's say, the ancient Greco-Roman world, the classical world as we call it. All of these accounts talk about great catastrophes that wiped out advanced civilizations, and that these civilizations were in fact operating at a much higher level than ourselves. Now, a much higher level, of course, does not necessarily mean electric toothbrushes and hydrogen bombs. It has to do with a kind of, let's say, with an inner development, a doctrine, actually, that sees in human existence a cosmic importance. Now, this is, of course, absolutely inimical, opposed by the central tenets of our own modern rationalist and materialist philosophy. It holds that we, as human beings, have a role to play in the grand cosmic scheme. Now, redating the Sphinx is a demonstration, or a proof, actually, that there is something to these ancient legends and accounts, because, very simply, the Sphinx is unquestionably the greatest, most spectacular sculpture on the face of the earth. If it was not produced by ancient Egyptians in the 4th dynasty around 2500 BC, but was, in fact, carved by unknown geniuses probably more than 10,000 years ago, maybe as much as 30 or 40,000 years ago, the whole picture of the evolution of civilization has to be rewritten. And the proof that the Sphinx must date from a much earlier period is the result of initially my own research into the geology of the Sphinx, and that, I should add, that research was itself inspired by a single line in a book by Shvala de Lubitsch, in which he is talking about the ancient Egyptian belief that their own civilization dated much, much further back than the 5,000 years thereabouts that is accorded it, because the Egyptian texts themselves, strangely enough, both residing in Italy, one called a stone tablet called the Palermo stone, and another rather fragmentary papyrus called the Torino papyrus, have accounts, Egyptian accounts themselves, dating from antiquity, in which they say that their own history stretches much, much further back into the past, and that there were long periods where Egypt was ruled by the Necheru, the gods themselves, and for thousands and thousands of years, and the names of those god kings are given, including the regnal years, and then subsequently by semi-divine kings called the Shemsu-Hor, the followers, or the companions of Horus, and those years, or those regnal years, are given as well. And even though the texts are fragmentary, when you add it all up, you get something like 36,000 BC. So that's the Egyptian understanding of the origins of their own civilization. And of course, modern academics arrogantly suppose that they know more about ancient Egyptian history than the ancient Egyptians themselves. Up until our work on the Sphinx, it was impossible to make a scientific case for the validity of the ancient Egyptian point of view. But a single line by Schwaller, in which he was talking about these Palermo stone and Turin papyrus and the accounts given by the Greco-Roman writers of classical antiquity who had access to the priests of Egypt, a single observation at the end of this long chapter in which he said, oh yes, and of course the Great Sphinx of Giza shows unquestionable signs of aquatic or water erosion. And when I read that, I realized that all the rest of the argument was textual, and that was not science, but water erosion was geology, and in principle, it should be possible to either prove or disprove that it was water weathering. If it is water weathering, then it becomes very difficult to allow the attribution of the Sphinx to stand at roughly 2500 BC, because Egypt is as much desert at that period as it is now, and in fact it has been desert for most of the last 12,000 years. So if the Sphinx had been weathered by water, it had to have been weathered at a time when the water was in Egypt, which is way, way, way back into the distant past. I developed this theory myself through a lot of library work, but I'm not a geologist, and so it required a geologist to either back up or refute my own research. It took another 10 years to find my colleague and friend Robert Schock, the highly qualified geologist with exactly the kind of expertise in the specialized fields that relate to weathering. And after several trips to Egypt, he backed up unconditionally, without any question, the water weathering hypothesis. The dating was and still is questionable, and the jury is still out on that question. But that it's much, much older than ancient Egypt because of the weathering is, as far as we're concerned, absolutely established. Our research was initially in 1991 presented at what is effectively the World Cup of Geology, the annual meeting of the National Geological Society, the American Geological Society in San Diego in 1991, with the attending geologists 100%, no exceptions, 100% convinced of our evidence. That then developed to our well-known documentary, The Mystery of the Sphinx, hosted by Charlton Heston, and it has been a hot subject of controversy ever since.
Are there any recent discoveries or developments that can give further evidence to your research?
Actually, a lot of evidence. We haven't been sitting on our hands or just battling with the archaeologists and the Egyptologists all the time. We've been accumulating more evidence, and in fact, a lot of it from Egypt we presented at a second Geological Society of America's meeting in 2000. This one, unfortunately, this one again was met with almost unanimous approval by the attending geologists, but it didn't get any press, actually, unlike the first one, which set up an international uproar. So really, the evidence has just been sitting there without any of the affected archaeologists or Egyptologists feeling the need to contest it. However, over the last couple of years, we've been furnished with what we regard as the smoking gun. Because this is actually evidence coming not from Egypt, but rather from Turkey, from a site called Göbekli Tepe. Now, the main argument used by the opposition is not so much to contest the water weathering hypothesis, but rather to insist that our theory is impossible, not just improbable, but impossible, because at the time, the dates that we are talking about, 10,000 BC, or even further back, there was no such thing as an advanced civilization. No building with stone, nothing but hunter-gatherers wandering around in bear skins, shooting their food, not even